All right, everybody, welcome in for our first ever podcast of 2 Feet Deep. My name is Derek Markgraf. I'm here with my co-host, Eddie Bromley. Eddie, give us a hello.
Well, hello, man. Based on that music, we're talking about monster trucks, right? Is that
Yes,
is
monster trucks and transformers. Yeah.
great? That because that's what I came prepared to talk about. When I heard the music, I was like, man, I could picture Macho Man Randy Savage running out. Oh wait, WWE. Wait a minute, no, never mind. Apparently, I'm not even prepared to talk about that. All right, great. I'm glad to be here this morning.
Yeah, man, I'm looking for a good time. Just for everybody out there, like I said, it's a brand new podcast. It's our first ever episode. It's called 2 Feet Deep because we're going to talk about some subjects that we're all in on, but we don't want to be too deep about it. So both our feet in, we're fully in on this and what we believe. But that being said, we don't want to go too deep. And so we're going to have some fun today with some Christian concepts and theology through a variety different of ways, like entertainment and where we're going in the world with technology and just some goofy stuff in between. Does that sound fun to you, Eddie?
Man, that sounds so much fun. So much fun.
This is going to be the funniest day ever.
The funny thing, be like secret submarine. Okay.
Secret submarine. Oh, that's a way back right there. For all
Okay.
of you that don't
Okay.
understand, Secret Submarine is a Nintendo game that nobody can find, but we all remember playing it.
It's a great game. Listen, I mean, mom and dad bought Little Caesars pizzas and let me invite two friends over to spend the night. So we played
It was so
Secret
cool.
Submarine. It's
So
so
awesome.
cool. It's so awesome.
Oh man.
All right. So what are we talking about today, man?
Man, we are talking. First thing we're going to talk about is the segment we call Entertainment Exegesis. And all of the segments in our show are intentionally named with ridiculous titles because that just kind of fits who we are. Um, so, Entertainment Exegesis, this every week, it's where we kind of take a deep dive into something related to some kind of entertainment. It could be music, songs, books, movies, could be holidays, vacations. And today, since we're coming up on Halloween, we're going to talk a little bit about the origins of Halloween.
Ooh, Halloween.
I don't know that's probably not that's a terrible, scary thing. Oh, here, how about this?
That scared me.
Yeah.
That was pretty scary.
It was a dark night, and they were driving down the road. So
I love
that's
Halloween. Should I love
yeah.
Halloween? Does it be bad Christian? Am I allowed to love that? Is Halloween something? Okay, so take us
Yeah, so I
through it,
think
man.
that's kind of what we're going to jump into today. Is some everybody has their opinions. I grew up celebrating Halloween. No qualms about what I wanted to be. If I was a vampire, if I was just a clown, if I was, I can remember being a pirate. I think I was a pirate about 6 years in a row. That or a karate person, which I never took karate in my life, but I was a big fan of Karate Kid, and I had a gi that was pajamas. It wasn't even a real gi, and I wore that around the neighborhood at least a couple of years. Yeah,
Well,
so
now
yeah,
Walmart's open 24 hours a day, and you can wear your pajamas there anytime you want.
That's,
So,
that's so true. That's so true. Like I said, I grew up in a house where Halloween was no big deal, and we were a very Christian household. We were at church every Sunday. My parents plus my grandmother were huge, influential in my spiritual journey to Christ and to falling in love with Jesus. Um, so Halloween did not have a negative impact on me in any way whatsoever. I am married, however, to a woman who does not like Halloween. She did not celebrate Halloween very much. Interestingly enough, her mom was born to a missionary who lived in Africa. And so she grew up in Africa, where the ideas of witchcraft and voodoo and demonic spiritual forces are seen a lot more than they are here in the West. And it was a very more than just a fun and games like we take it here for a lot of us. It's a very real uh, experience. And so that caused a very negative point of view towards Halloween. And so I'm not going to say there's been any knockdown, drag out fights in our house about it. But there's certainly been some conversations about what our kids are allowed to do on Halloween and what they're not allowed to do. And we compromised on like this year, my daughter's going to go as an elf. She wanted to go as a witch, you're never going to fly past mom with going as a witch, but you can go as an elf. So, and I think that's kind of what breeds this conversation today. So I'm going to jump in with just some of the origins. Do you know anything about Halloween?
So I was raised in a non-religious home. However, to be in a pretty secular home, we were kind of aware of some of the darker elements of. But it's funny because Halloween was perceived in my household as a playful thing. It wasn't perceived as a real dance with the demonic or anything like that. So it was. Yeah, so coming in to the Christian faith, I had no negative connotations around Halloween at all. I was surprised. It's funny how you run into some of the cultural things of Christianity if you don't grow up in it. And so for me, it was a culturally interesting that some of my fellow Christians had objections to Halloween because I didn't come into the Christian faith with any preconceived ideas really about
Yeah.
Halloween at all. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's really
Oh,
interesting.
well,
And
I
it's,
think I understood. I think I understood some of their objections. I just, I didn't necessarily share them. I just wondered about them, really. So, what about the
yeah.
origins of Halloween?
Well, so interestingly enough, it does come. So, I mean, okay, I've researched a few different articles, and of course, all of these links will be in our show notes for people to who want to, actually read the articles in depth. But it's not really controversy, but I'm trying to figure out how they blend together because it is an ancient Celtic festival that is known as Samhain. And so that's kind of where its origins started. I think around the 7th, 8th century, Pope Gregory III moved the holiday to November 1st. And he kind of likely did this to try to Christianize it, make it kind of a substitute for a pagan festival, which I think is kind of normal throughout history. I know eventually you're going to do one on Christmas too. And I think we'll kind of revisit that same idea. But the day before the saintly celebration became known as All Hallows Eve or Halloween. So that's kind of where we get the name Halloween. It was believed on this day, and this is what I really did find this interesting, that the souls of the dead would return to the homes. And the reason people ended up to dressing up on Halloween was because they wanted to ward off evil spirits. So dressing up was never about being an evil spirit or representing an evil spirit. From the ancient tradition, it was about warding off those evil spirits. So that to me kind of flies in the face of what a lot of us think about Halloween. Eventually, it did move into popularity into the United States in the early 20th century, around the 1840s. It did come from the Irish Scottish community. Where that custom of guising yourself eventually turned into a person who would dress up in a costume and they would go around and tell a joke or a poem, and they did that so that they would receive a treat. And this is kind of the one idea of how trick-or-treating became popular. However, there is another idea out there that apparently was happening, and so I'm a little curious myself as to whether these things sprung up in two different places. But one article demonstrates how the idea, once it got here into the United States, was originally celebrated for kids. Then eventually adults jumped in and they started creating silly parties, and they would do these silly rituals where like they would put nuts by a fireplace and that would determine who you might marry. You would have like 3 nuts that you would set in front of the fire, and you would have one of them would be like, okay, that's Charlene and that's Mary and that's Leah, and whichever nut popped first would be the person that you're going to marry, and they just did
Well,
these
that's how
silly
I
little
chose
games.
Stacy. Wow,
Well,
that's
that
how I
makes the
chose
most
my wife.
sense. I mean, it makes the most. It makes the absolute most sense because clearly there's either demonic or divine intervention there. But what's funny is like depending on how the nut popped would determine the happiness of your marriage. So I don't know if it was like if your nut totally exploded, it was like you're gonna marry Charlene and it's gonna be terrible, but you don't have any way out because it's been determined by the nuts.
The fates have agreed.
That's right.
And it's
So don't
actually,
even try to go anywhere else. You're
things are just
doomed
going to
for
blow
marital unhappiness.
apart.
So anyway, there was a tradition from Jack the Trickster, who was I guess, a mythological figure that outwitted the devil, and the devil got frustrated with him for outwitting him, and the devil didn't want him in hell, so he cursed him to earth with a light inside a turnip. And so this
It's
is where we get the idea of the jack-o'-lantern is from this trickster who outwitted the devil. And of course, when they brought that tradition over here to the United States, they found these beautiful orange big fruits that became even more fun and bigger to create a face in. And so that's kind of where the where how we transitioned out of turnips into pumpkins. The colors were originally yellow and brown, and they became orange and black after the pumpkins because of the orange. And then trick or treating here in the United States, again, going back to this idea, is actually less than 100 years old. And it started with adults trying to keep kids from vandalizing the cities. What would happen is on this All Hallows Eve, kids would go out and they would begin to vandalize. And they said, well, let's do something for them. Um, so they started encouraging them to dress up, and if you stay off the streets out there, come to our houses, we'll give you treats and stuff. So again, I don't exactly know how that marries in with the other tradition of trick-or-treating. I don't know if those were things that came about in two different places, and because the United States is huge. um, I don't know how those marry together, but I do believe that both of those are factual experiences of how Halloween's trick or treating process became about. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
only that it's not surprising that a holiday's origins would be a blend of traditions. Christmas itself. So at some point we're going to talk a little more about Christmas, but uh, January the 6th, or which is the 12th day of Christmas, was celebrated before the 25th of December was celebrated. So,
Mm-hmm.
the last day of the Christmas season was being celebrated 10 to 20 years before Christmas becomes sort of the anniversary of Jesus's birth, and so those two traditions sort of backed into each other and merged, and
Interesting.
yeah, so it wouldn't be surprising to me that
Right.
something as
Again,
interesting as trick or treating have a couple of different origins, and they end up merging together in some kind of interesting way.
right, right. Yeah, very good, very good. So in the 20th century, that's when we really begin to see the mass marketing for decorations for Halloween. In the 1950s, that's the first time people really start to begin to associate it truly with some more horror aspects as they begin to watch horror movies in conjunction with Halloween. Which, if you've ever seen a 1950s horror movie, I think that all of them are like B movies. And there's almost as much a comedic plot to them as there is anything scary. But 1978 is when we really see a big push into horror elements. And can you guess why?
Was it a scary movie?
There's a really big scary movie that came out in
Was
1978.
it was it was it Airplane? Well,
You know
wait a minute.
what?
Wait, can I have another guess? Was it Halloween?
It indeed was Halloween, and Michael Myers came to the forefront. And so it's interesting to me how this movie really had a big push into pushing us in really to the edge of making this something that from fun and silly and goofy to starting to really add in the big horror elements and thinking of death and thinking of demonic possession and all of that stuff started to come from these Halloween series movies, and the big one was 1978. In the 2000s, you really saw that push towards sexy costumes, which thank God we're finally getting back out of those. Because as someone who has a 10-year-old daughter, I'm just glad that I don't have to walk down aisles and be like trying to explain why there's a woman with half her clothes on and that's somehow related to Halloween. I just always thought that was stupid.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but that's my opinion about it. So really interesting overall is this Halloween concept really tried to come from a place that, one, was to thwart off evil, and two, ultimately, especially when it got here to the United States, was something that was fun and games and silly. Never
Yeah.
intended. It was basically another excuse to just have some fun and have some friends over. Who doesn't like to dress up? Who doesn't like to eat snacks? I eat snacks whether I dress up or not. So I'm a big fan of that, you know. So for me, I think it's a little harder knowing this research to put a negative context around Halloween. Ultimately, I think it kind of goes back to, I look at the Bible verse from 1 Corinthians 10, verse 31. And if you got a second, I'm going to read that to you. It says, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it for the glory of God." Now, in this particular passage, and I don't want to go too deep, but Paul's talking about what food people are allowed to eat and what they're not allowed to eat, and whether if it was intended for idol worship or not intended for idol worship. And ultimately, he's kind of at this place, where he says it is okay ultimately to eat it. It doesn't matter because it's not a real God, But he says equally, it's important that you don't cause other people to stumble, and so don't eat it if it's gonna affect other people within your circles, And then he lands at this very last verse where he says, "It doesn't matter what you do, just make sure whatever you're doing, do it for the glory of God." And that's kind of the way I look at Halloween. I do have friends that struggle with the concept. Obviously, I'm married to one, so I try not to push but at the same time, I want my kids to grow up and have fun with it. And so in our household,
Yeah.
Leah and I've, we've come to a place where we don't push each other. I'm certainly not going to push the scarier, more evil elements of it, and that's fine by me. But I do, it's fine for my daughter to go dressed up as an elf. I think about the scariest thing we've ever done is we allowed our kids to go as zombies. Uh, you know, um, so that's kind of where I land. But I'm not the only person that has an opinion. What do you think?
Well, it's funny because you mentioned its origins with the Celtic people, and that it's related to, the journey of their ancestors' souls, and that's a really common idea in the ancient world. Almost everywhere in the world, that there's something that kind of corresponds to that, and but it's interesting that that the church very early on made a provision for that to uh, be observed in a Christian way, right? Because obviously as Christians we care about what happens to our loved ones beyond this life and so forth. But it's also not surprising to me that even early on though there'd be some anxiety about that, right? So you mentioned the idea of dressing up to ward off evil spirits. Obviously, you know, we feel some uncertainty. We feel vulnerable when we get close to the mystery of death. Uh, but it's funny that you mentioned how late in the development of this uh, holiday that the really dark stuff starts entering in. I mean, the 1970s. I mean, wow,
Right.
that's pretty
Yeah. Seems like
late.
yesterday.
Yeah, it seems like yesterday, but it's funny how something so big and it may sound strange, but the Halloween movie was a cultural phenomenon that really dealt with some pretty dark stuff, and it was so big that it actually did shape the way we think about things. But it begs the question: why do we even run down the road of thinking about some of this scary stuff? And I think part of it is um, we have to find safe ways to deal with our fear, right? Because we're all afraid of things. We all have lots of things we're afraid of, and there's actually something really psychologically healthy about finding safe ways to deal with some of the things we're afraid of. Now, obviously, you know, can it become morbid? Truthfully, I'm not a real big fan of the Halloween movies. For me, they
Hmm.
feel
Me
morbid.
neither.
Now, I think there'd be
Yep.
some
Me
people
neither.
that would say, "Oh, come on," but to me, they do feel morbid. They're literally about teenagers who are having sex in the woods now they're being killed. And
Right. It's
it's
not
like,
something
man,
that I'm going to recommend people go see.
right.
I mean, yes, it was this great, it was this huge cultural phenomenon, but at the same time, just let it be.
Right, right. I even wondered many times those that are huge fans of the Halloween movies. What exactly is it that they think those movies are about? But so on one hand, obviously there are, and we might not always agree where the line is. There can be a morbid curiosity with the darkness that's not good.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I think there's safe ways of dealing with our fear. I mean, that's what a roller coaster is, right? I mean, a roller coaster is, I'm afraid of heights and I'm afraid of falling, but in a controlled situation, I can take a peek at that and laugh at that even.
And it can be
To me,
fun.
that
Yeah.
feels pretty healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I don't know. I guess I think you landed us in a good place. Listen, you may have very valid reasons for avoiding Halloween altogether, and you're doing that in obedience to God, fine. Or
Hmm.
you Halloween's an opportunity to safely poke fun at some of your fears, and you can do that as a Christian, fine. Whichever path, whichever one you choose, you know, just make sure you're doing it because it's an expression of your obedience to God. I think that's a good place.
Right. I do too. I think where I struggle is people that, you know, that come down the middle of, well, not down the middle, that come down on one side or the other so extremely hard that they feel like the others on the other side are either robbing people from something or causing people to ultimately go into evil,
Right.
especially because they fear the pagan history. And to that, I would say, you know, if the I know a lot of these people that go on and they worship Christmas. And I'm not going to go into this hugely because you're going to do, I know in a few episodes, you're going to do some stuff on
Yeah.
Christmas. But I will say this actually, there are more pagan traditions that we practice during Christmas than there are during Halloween. And that's very
Yeah.
interesting. And can you carry that same idea from Christmas into Halloween, or are you forced? You know, shouldn't you be consistent? You know, that's my
Yep.
thoughts.
Well, yeah. If the objection is paganism, or one, you mentioned the Celtic Druid peoples that celebrated Samhain. We know very little about that. I
Yeah,
mean, what
extremely
we
small amount.
you bo- you boil down what we really know about that. It had something to do with you know with the observation of what happens to their ancestors after death. Okay, that's not a whole lot to go on. I mean, and that's a pretty broad that's a pretty broad thing that happens almost in every culture in the world in some form or fashion. So that doesn't really even make Samhain all that particularly unique. It doesn't make it unique at all. Actually, it just and we don't know a whole lot about the Celtic Druid people, the Nordic people that from which we get a lot of our Christmas stuff. We know a lot about them.
Yeah,
We know a
yeah,
whole
a
lot
whole lot
about
more.
them. So
Mhm.
my thought is, if the objection is that your pagan ancestors did something around this date a long time ago, and that's your objection, that seems like a pretty flimsy one to me.
Right. Well, interestingly enough, as you just brought this up about Sam Heen and how little we know about it, which of course I do know that there's just so very little we know about, and we just know it had something to do with some kind of observation of the people that had passed before them, and it makes me think, what is a funeral?
Yes, yes,
You know, I
yes,
mean,
yeah,
isn't that where we
right,
celebrate the dead? And we
yeah,
celebrate the life that they lived, and we do this in
yeah,
observance and some kind of memory of those that have now gone before us. And I'm like, and now again, I'm not saying at all that's a druid practice. No, I actually think it's a wonderful practice that we celebrate their lives, and I think it can be very healing for us as well. But because we know so little about Sam Heen, it makes me ask the question, what was this? What was their purpose behind it? And
Yeah.
ultimately, that's the whole point of this origins talk, is where's your heart in the matter?
Yeah. 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 Excellent, man. I think fantastic. Yeah, that's really good.
Well, let's move on. Um,
All
Next
right.
segment is a little segment we like to call "What the What."
What the-
And this is a segment where now, for those of you that haven't picked up already on this or not, Eddie is a pastor, has been in ministry for how many years? Because you're so much older than me.
Two, two. Oh, wait a minute. No, 30 years. And
30.
I
Okay.
think I think
And I,
we're only doing a video screenshot for if for YouTube. At some point, when you see what we actually look like, well, Derek still looks young and strapping. I look like an old dude sporting a ball cap. Um,
aren't you still sitting in your
today I'm
robe?
sporting. I am. I'm sporting a ball cap that is celebrating my current favorite sports team. The
It's like your your cap is blank.
yeah,
I know.
that is
That's like
currently
perfect.
my favorite sports team.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So that's Eddie, in a nutshell. Loves sports and never watches them. Never has any concern to
Yeah,
follow them. But if you talk to him, he's like, "Oh yeah, I love sports. I love the Cubs. I love them. They're great."
I don't know who's playing for them. Don't know what their record is. Yeah, well, what's happened to our family in the last few years is as my kids have migrated to different places, they're rooting for teams that I didn't even know existed 2 years ago, and I'm going to these ball games of sports teams. And I'm rude and I'm shouting like a maniac through the game, like I know what I'm watching, and I don't.
Right. But that's the part of it. That's the fun of it. That's the community element.
Yeah,
I myself,
yeah.
I've been in ministry for just slightly over 20 years. So I've got a little less time. That tells you that I'm so much younger than Eddie.
Strapping young man.
Yeah, so much younger than Eddie. But through the years, we've both pastored in multiple churches. We've both been involved in youth ministry, children's ministry, adult ministry. Also, you mean about every side of it. Music ministry. We've both had our hands in every aspect of it. And over the years, we've come across a lot of wonderful questions that Christians and non-Christians alike have about Christianity. And sometimes it's based on just a concept. Sometimes it's based on a specific biblical passage. Sometimes it's just a biblical verse. And so, what the what segment is, we try to go in and answer one of those questions. We don't try to spend a lot of time here, but we do like to just kind of bring up this idea to help maybe clarify something. Maybe it's a question you've had. We'd also love for you to write in. If you got questions of your own for the what segment, just put what the what on there or WTW and then put out your question beside it. And we'll try to get in there and answer some of those. So today's comes from, I think, kind of, here's the reality. This is a not in the Bible, but a lot of people think it is. It's a saying that's associated with Ben Franklin, and actually came long before Ben Franklin, and that is this idea that God helps those who help themselves. You ever heard this in your church?
Oh yes.
You ever heard it in any other churches?
Almost all of them.
Almost all of them. When I was
Almost
a kid,
every one.
I had a struggle. I think I was just having trouble with my girlfriend or something at the time, and I went to the preacher to where we both went to church at, and I was like, I don't know how to deal with this situation. I know God says that I know that the Bible says that God helps those that help themselves, and he stopped me right there, and he's like, no, it doesn't. And I was like, what? And he's like, no, the Bible doesn't say that at all. And it's so true. So I pulled up
Yes. Yeah.
8 Romans 8 verse 1 through 4, and I just want to remind everybody that the reason that we are saved at all has nothing to do with anything that we did or we can ever do. It has
That's right.
everything to do with God and his plan of salvation through his son Jesus Christ for us. And that right there tells you that we serve a God who is the opposite of helps those who helps themselves. As a matter of fact, he helps those who can never help themselves. And this is a passage from Paul in chapter 8, verses 1 through 4. I'm going to read it real quick. It says, So now there is no condemnation for those who belong to Christ Jesus. And because you belong to him, the power of the life-giving Spirit has freed you from the power of sin that leads to death. The law of Moses was unable to save us because of the weakness of our sinful nature. So God did what the law could not do. He sent his own son in a body like the bodies we sinners have. And in that body, God declared an end to sin's control over us by giving his son as a sacrifice for our sins. He did this so that the just requirement of the law would be fully satisfied for us who no longer follow our sinful natures, but instead follow the Holy Spirit. That is from the New Living Translation. And what I love about that is it goes in a lot with the law. And, a lot of people struggle with the concept of the law too. And really, the simplest thing for me about the law is it was set there in motion, I believe, to show us our inability to live up to the requirements of what it takes to meet God's standard, because God is perfect and we are not. And there's a lot in this passage we could go into about sacrifices, and maybe that's a question for another day of why did God require sacrifices and stuff. And I think that'd be a great topic for another time. But in the order to, in preserving time today, I just want us to acknowledge that law was there to show us that the very thing that this idea says is something we can't do. God helps those who help themselves. We tried that with the law, and we proved that we can't help ourselves, that only God can save us, and that can only be done through his life-giving sacrifice of his son, Jesus Christ. What do you have to add to that?
Well, it's funny because the Torah itself says that you won't be able to do it, right? So Moses comes down from the mountain. He has the tablets, and he says, "Here's God's part. Here's your part. What do you say?" And they say, "Yes." And Moses goes, "Well, here's the thing. You're not actually going to be able to do your part." So the Torah itself
They were
actually
already
says that.
screwing it up when he came down the mountain.
Right. And it's not just Exodus, it's Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy says, look, you're going to have constantly before you a set of choices. A choice, and the choices are always really going to boil down to life or death. But in the end, you're going to be unable to consistently choose life. You're going to fall down the path of death, and it's going to be God in the end that's going to have to rescue you. And so the Torah itself, you're right. I mean, the law of the Torah is such a complicated thing as far as how it relates, especially to Gentile Christians. But the bottom line is that what the Torah points out, it's like the perfect standard, right? But then you put it against a crooked wall, and you realize, oh man, I'm not measuring up at all. I'm not plumb. I'm not straight. I'm not, you know,
Mm.
things are not right. And what does that mean? Well, it means that the human race needs a savior, right? It needs rescuing, and
And I
and
think
so
this is true for the
this.
mundane things in our life too.
Oh my gosh, yes, and well, I mean, think about. So I was with a group yesterday. We were talking about how bad wealth inequality is getting all over the world, and it's happening no matter what kind of economic system is in place, whether it's communism or free market or socialism or theocracy or secular society. Uh, Almost every country in the world right now is experiencing the dynamic where the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Why?
Mm.
Especially when, at some common sense level, we can say people ought to be able to survive. They ought to be able to have their basic, because there's something fundamentally broken with humankind, and the answer is not going to be simply a political arrangement, because
Right.
any
There's
kind of
not a
political
correct
arrangement,
governmental system that's
right?
going to
And,
just
and
magically
any of them
fix
can
our
be.
human spiritual issues.
That's right. Any of them can be exploited. Any power arrangement can be exploited. That's how weird things like apartheids get set up, right? Where 20% of the population controls the whole thing. I mean, how does that happen? And yet it happens all over the world in all
Right.
kinds of different situations. Yeah. So, obviously, there's a half truth in Benjamin Franklin's saying that God helps those that help themselves. If we do have some part to play in our
We do
human
reap what we
story.
sow.
We do reap what we sow, and God is not in the business of doing magic. Grace is not the same thing as magic. We don't sort of wish and hope for things to happen, and God goes, "Okay, fine. I'll just I'll do the dishes for you." That's not the way
Mhm.
it works, right?
Yeah,
But
right, right.
um, right. But at the same time, if in my mind, this is the primary difference between a biblical worldview and a secular worldview, in that where do you believe that your hope is best placed? And what do you think the best possible way to pursue wholeness as human race? Is it going to be self-generated? Are we going to be able to sort of create for ourselves, or is it something we're going to have to be open to that God brings about? And I think it's the fundamental difference between a secular worldview and a biblical worldview.
Yeah.
I know we're going to talk about technology here, but there's a lot of anxiety, fear, and hope around things like artificial intelligence. What's really weird about artificial intelligence is that it, like every other technology, is going to be the result of whatever we make it.
Mm, yep, yep, yep. And
Like whether it
it is
brings
scary and it is hopeful both.
Yes, yes.
And we're going to
Yeah,
get
but
there.
for
Before we do, though,
yeah,
I do want to move us along. But I hope that is helpful to people who have heard that their entire lives, and to understand that even in the mundane, there's a God waiting for you to call out to them, who helps you in the mundane and helps you in the large. And by large, I mean, your salvation both. He's a God who loves and is continually there for us, and he desires us to be in concert with him. Um, so with that, we're going to move on to the His Name News Game. And the His Name
his
News
name
Game is this.
news game brought to
Yes,
you by
that's the
Cola.
stupidest title yet. Brought to you by what?
Brought to you by Schindler's Diamonds. Okay, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah,
totally made up.
yeah,
We don't have any sponsors
uh,
yet, but if you all are out there and you understand how incredible this podcast is, and you think,
that's
"Gosh,
right.
I want to be associated with those guys," then you let us know. We do have an email, and it is called 2feetdeeppodcast@gmail.com, and that's all spelled out:
That's
two
right.
feet deep podcast at gmail.com.
If you'd like to sponsor this at I don't know, a cool $50,000 a month, Derek and I will promptly quit our jobs and begin pumping out lots of useless podcasts. So
That's right. That'll be more than one. So
there may be
anyway, His
two or
Name
more.
News Game. There may be two. That's right. His Name News Game is a silly segment because, as you can see, Eddie and I take everything seriously. Um, and this is one where we just
Yeah.
try to stump each other. Now, we do have show notes, and we do have outlines that we follow. But the thing about these segments is there's only like a little snippet in there. There's no notes around it or anything. And the idea behind it was to have fun, to find this random stupid news story each week, and we try to stump the other person by saying, "How are you going to tie that into the Bible?" And so, Eddie, mine this week. Are you ready for this?
All right. Yeah, I'm ready,
Okay.
brother. All right.
This is, I'm going to read the whole article because it's very short. Sheep sneak into greenhouse and eat 600 pounds of marijuana. So, a flock of sheep in Magnesia, Greece, snuck into a greenhouse and scarfed down 600 pounds of marijuana cultivated for medical use. According to the newspaper.gr, the cannabis grow proprietor, Yanis, or I'm not going to even try to say his last name, said that the stoned sheep were jumping higher than goats. I hope the sheep's shenanigans don't put the owner in a bad mood. All right, and then they said sorry. So that's the whole article.
That is the
that's the whole,
whole article. So now
that
I've
is
got
the
to have
whole
a
article.
sermon. tie-in here from the Bible. Well, all right. So Psalm 23 says He leads us beside green pastures. Okay,
Oh
that's
gosh,
a problem.
that's perfect. I think that's exactly what he's talking about.
Let's see. Set your mind on things high above. Well, okay. Let's see.
Oh, okay.
That's
How many dad jokes can you put into this? And hey, here's the thing, folks. We're not promising that we're going to be able to successfully do it.
that would be able to successfully. All right, so they sneak in. They eat a bunch of marijuana, and they're jumping higher than goats. Wow, boy.
Now, there
Um,
is a lot in the
uh,
Bible about sheep and the goats.
oh, there is a lot about sheep and the goats. In this case, I think the goats may fare better. Okay, what was?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's what I
hold
was
on,
thinking.
hold on. I'm using the Bible app right now. Uh, All right, I'm looking. I'm
Do,
looking up the
do, do,
passage.
do, 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 do.
Let's see. I know, right? Okay. Psalm 118. With your help, I can advance against any troop. With my God, I can jump over any high wall.
I hope we're not encouraging people to make marijuana their god, as seeing as how that's the result of the reason the sheep were jumping so high.
All right, so Psalm 18 is this passage
I think Isaiah
about
flies. Isaiah, I believe it's you can will soar like wings on eagles. Okay. Well, anyway, go ahead.
Psalm 19 or Psalm 18 is about attacking this fortified city and scaling over the walls, and I'm thinking these sheep are halfway there, right? They're
They're halfway
uh,
there, brother.
there. I don't know what they're going to do when they get over the wall, but because I don't think
Yeah,
anybody's been
they'll
eating
be
that
in a
much
bad
cannabis.
situation.
Right, they're not going to be in any kind of fighting mood. I live outside of Memphis. Memphis is right now. It's been named the most dangerous city in the world, or not in the world. No, sorry, most dangerous city in the United States. Um, and obviously drugs play a big part of that. And if I
Mhm.
see somebody that I think's on meth, I'm afraid. The thing I am not afraid of, I am not afraid of a group of guys that get out of the car and they've been smoking cannabis.
That's
But
exactly
no,
right.
uh, you know, we pulled up to. We have this donut shop in Memphis, and it is like one of our landmarks. And we pulled up one night about 11 o'clock to get donuts, and this dude pulls up beside us, and he opens the door, and holy cow! I mean, a cloud rolled out. I was not afraid of this guy doing anything violent to me. I was afraid of getting in front of him in a donut, in a
We're in a
donut
donut line.
shop. You
I
know,
wonder if this is the
uh,
common ground for people on drugs and police officers. Like everybody knows this
yeah,
is a safe space.
this is
We're
a
at the
safe.
donut
We're
shop.
here for the same exact. We're here for the exact same reason, brother.
Yeah. Okay. That's it.
uh,
Oh, well, anyway, that's fun. That's a fun little segment. I can't wait to see what you've got for me next week. Uh, I don't know that there's a whole lot that we can pull from that, other than that God is
the
God
two
does
people who
allow us.
subscribe. The two
Go
people
ahead.
who subscribed at the beginning of our podcast got to this segment and just unsubscribed.
That's that's right. That's right. They're right. All right. They're like, wait a minute. Are they condoning drugs? Are they not condoning drugs? Where do they stand on drugs? Yeah. So
Really?
that's a mystery for another day, folks.
Yeah, that is a mystery for another day.
I will say that Eddie and I both do take drugs. However, they are the legal kind that were prescribed to us by doctors.
Yeah, mine are the old man ones, the ones that make sure I have to get up like 4 times during the middle of the night. So,
That's because you're ancient. Oh
I
man!
know,
All right,
I
well,
know.
let's move on to the last segment today, and I want to. I think we got about 15 minutes for what we would
All
love
right,
to have about a 45-minute conversation over. But this is
all right.
astrological AI, and what that means is this is just a tech segment about how tech has evolved uh, and how it's helped us grow and how it's maybe even stunted our growth throughout history and what it could look like going forward. So, not everything will be about artificial intelligence in this segment, but we just thought that was a fun name. And by fun, I mean, of course, just as silly as the other ones. So, there's an article on Inverse by Mark Saltzman called What's Next After Smartphones? And I thought this was interesting. Um, because that's kind of his big question. Right now there's a lot of things. There's smart rings out there. There's a smart ring called Aura. There's a Hexoskin smart clothing that you can wear that will, much like your watches, how they can regulate what your heart rate does and stuff. These clothing do that, but to a much better and a much more accurate ability. There are Echo frames, which are glasses from Alexa in them, which are kind of, these glasses and eyewear, they kind of remind me like, I know you and I are both big comic nerds and we love the Avengers movies, and they kind of remind me of Tony Stark with his little glasses and how they can do everything. The latest one that I know is Lucid Light eyewear, which are glasses with the Chat GPT in them. And I don't know if there's like, maybe there's some kind of speaker that's around the back of the ears that allow you to talk to your phones and they answer questions for you, allow you to see things. But it kind of makes me wonder, like, where are we headed? There's companies that believe that, we're not going to go any further and that we're actually always going to rely on the smartphone. But then you see there's companies that are popping up that are producing different ways in which we use very similar or same technology as what our smartphones do, maybe even in a more handy way. And so it kind of begs that question of, what is AI going to have for us in the future? Are we going to stop with smartphones, as some companies believe we're going to always just kind of result back to them, or are we going to have stuff that are like the smart rings from Aurora, which, they're meant to be a less obtrusive than the phone or the smartwatch. The clothing is something that you consistently have on you. I know, like, I get very frustrated when I have to take my watch off and charge it. I don't. I guess because we change clothes every day, that's not an issue with the Hexo skin wear. I don't know. This is all. A lot of this is kind of like breaking and new, and a lot of it's been around for a little bit. Um, but I do want to draw in this idea that Proverbs 16:4 says, "The Lord has made everything for His own purposes, even the wicked for a day of disaster." And so I'm like, a lot of people look to AI and think that it's easy and evil. A lot of it look to it and think it's hopeful. In saying that, I don't know. What do you think? We read a verse like that where it
Gosh,
seems like everything could be ordained by God, and then, but there's of course our free will and how often we screw God's, uh, intentions up. Um, so I thought this would just be a fun place to start.
oh man, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, so I'm gonna. I guess the piece I'm gonna pick up what you're laying down is, is the smartphone. Is it gonna be, is it kind of around forever, or will we move on to some other form? It's funny because I anticipated this one. That you provided some notes, so I looked, and yeah, there's some folks that think that the iPhone or the smartphone, Samsung, whatever, that it's kind of at its final form. It's not going to change much. Where you're right, there are some people that
How
think
much more
it's
can we
gonna.
do?
Right. Well, and you think there are some things that are more or less in the form they've been in for a long time, like a car.
Hmm.
Somebody from 1920, when they got into a car from 2023, there would be some things that would seem a little strange to them, but there would be nothing fundamentally different from what they knew as a car. They might be surprised that, it's as comfortable, that it can go as fast, that it can go as far, that it has some of the bells and whistles, but they wouldn't need whole new driving instruction. They'd be able to pretty well operate it immediately. It's more or less in the same form that it was in 1920. Boats, boats are not fundamentally different than they were a thousand
Right.
years ago. They're
Right.
kind of in their final form. unless somebody can really think of. But a submarine? Now, you brought somebody from 1,000 years ago and you showed them a submarine. Now they're surprised.
Not even. I mean, even the difference of U-boats compared to now with the submarine technology. You know,
Yep.
and that's
Yep.
just what 80 years ago.
Right. Are we using phones kind of in the form that they're in now? Obviously the smartphone was a big jump from the rotary phone or the dial phone that was on the wall. I mean, it was enough different that I think all of us that lived through the transition feel a little surprised by what a smartphone is compared to what any of us grew up with when a phone was on a
Right.
wall. You had to be by
Right.
it, and you left, and there wasn't any way to get a hold of you, and you couldn't watch
Mm-hmm.
videos on it, and but
Right.
but
You missed a
you
call. You
know,
just missed a call. You know,
right. But
we didn't
yeah,
even have an answering machine growing up.
right. But is this basically the shape and size and feel that it's going to be 50 years from now? I'm going to make a guess. My guess is yes. Unless AI and computers can end up doing something really beyond what I can think of, which is highly possible. I feel like
I'd say highly likely,
50 years.
honestly.
Yeah, right. But I mean, unless it's like imprinted on your eye or something. I mean, you're gonna have to have something from which you're taking these calls, you're watching the videos. I mean, unless it projects it out in front of you or something. I mean, I'm thinking it's
Well,
gonna have to have a
you say that,
screen.
and that makes me think of the eyewear, though. I mean, like, what is this?
Yeah,
The eyewear has a screen that sits in front of you. How far
yeah.
off
I feel
from Tony
about
Stark technology are we really?
I feel about eyewear the same way I feel about um, AirPods. AirPods are a great idea until you go jogging with them. So and then of course you can buy the accessory string to put on them to turn them back into just normal earbuds.
Right, yeah. Well, that actually begs the question of what smartphones have done to us already, of how we've advanced through history. And you look at writing techniques and how we went from, spoken to finally putting stuff on walls and caves, which are the hieroglyphics. Then we eventually got an alphabet created to where we began to write notes, and then we began to um, have a different form of communication when the telephone was actually invented, to where we didn't have to write letters as much. And then the telephones have now advanced so far that we've gone back to writing short notes in the form of text. And now, and the last, 5 to 10 years, our texts have become so oriented around what we call emojis that we've gone back to hieroglyphics. And so I'm like,
We've default.
yeah, I mean, like, are we going forward or are we going backwards?
I don't know. I love the movie. What was the movie? Um, I'm confusing the movie Wally. I was going to say Up, but but that's the wrong movie. Wally. You remember what humans become in Wally? They're
I
like
actually have
these
never seen
jelly beans.
Wally.
You have never seen Wally? Oh my gosh.
No,
Okay,
and,
so
and, and, and to make it worse for you, I hate it up. I thought it was a terrible movie.
oh well, they're not related at all. So Wally, the world becomes so polluted that basically the cruise lines create these spaceships, and everybody's given these little recliner chairs where they don't even have to walk around to get to the buffet or the shuffleboard place, or whatever. Before long, they've lost their ability to do anything but just zoom around on their seats, watching screens and eating buffets all
Oh
day.
wow, that's a scary concept that unfortunately seems way closer than I want it to be.
Yeah, so all they do, they're these fat little jelly bean like things. It's all the humans are, and they look at screens all day, and they eat all day, and they laugh all day, and they're completely useless. I
Oh
guess they're
man, that's
they're playing
crazy.
Candy Crush all day long and snacking. I don't know, which sadly is not a far description from my daily habits. So
Oh geez. Well, my friend, I think we're coming up on the end of our time here. Trying to stay within about an hour. It's been fun, and I think that there's been some stuff to learn. I think there's been some stuff that we can still question. Eddie and I, neither one think that we have all the answers to all these things. We have opinions like everybody else, and we like to have some fun with it, because if we can't laugh in this life, then I don't know that I want to be here. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So I'm going to take us out on Genesis 1:27, and it's just reminding us of who we are, and ultimately what makes us human isn't anything other than that we're created in the image of God. So God created human beings in His own image. In the image of God, He created them, male and female. He created them, and I want us to take that out there. Regardless of your thoughts on Halloween, regardless on the His Name News claim, and your thoughts on marijuana and weed. We're all in this together. We're all created in the image of God, and ultimately God is the source of answers. And I love discussion. I love open dialogue where we don't attack each other, but that we try to have some good common sense conversations. And ultimately, I think that's what you and I kind of hope that we get out of this. Is you and I don't always agree on everything, but we're going to have a fun, open conversation, and dive into God's word in the process, and kind of see where He can lead us to.
All right, brother. Had some fun, man. I look forward to doing it again real soon.
Yep, and we hope you guys see us back here next week, same time, same thing. This will drop at the time it's going to drop, because we don't know when it's going to drop, nor do we know when the next one's going to drop. So just keep looking, and we'll catch you next time. Goodbye, everybody. Hey everyone, we do want to take a minute to say thank you to all of our listeners, and we also want to do a special shout out to Silverman Sounds, who provided the royalty-free music that we use in each of our episodes. We have a wonderful time. It's great music. Head on over there and check it out. Royalty-free music at silvermansounds.com.